Workflow is perhaps DevTrack's most powerful feature. From this page, you can indicate whether or not you want to use multiple workflows for different types of work items. You can also choose whether or not your workflow is state or transition based. The difference between the two is whether or not workflow enforcement happens at the state level or at the transition level. With a transition workflow, users click on an intuitively named transition button to forward the work item or change status, whereas with a state-based workflow, they select which state they want to move to next. There is also a more granular control with a transition-based workflow, as you can indicate what rules to enforce for every single transition coming out of a state. For state-dependent options, you can specify applicable owners, which fields are mandatory, read-only, or invisible when editing an item in that state. For transition-dependent options, you can specify which fields are mandatory, read-only, or invisible prior to moving into the next state. You can also enforce who can move items to the next state. TechExcel recommends that you use a transition-based workflow. The workflow design page is designed for ease of use. There's no coding involved, and it's just simple mouse clicks to create your workflow visually. To add a new state, simply right-click, click on Add a State, give it a name, and indicate whether or not this is an open or a closed state. Next, you'll want to draw transition lines going to this state. And you'll want to give this transition a name. The Workflow Settings page contains settings that are enabled for all states and transitions in the workflow options. If you use a state-based workflow, transitions will not appear here. Each item with a plus sign next to it indicates a state. You can define which fields are read-only, invisible, or mandatory, and the applicable owners for items moving into the state. With this feature turned on, you cannot assign tasks to an owner that's not selected in this list. When you expand a state, the transitions leaving the state will be displayed underneath. You can again choose which fields are read-only, invisible, or mandatory when using this transition before moving to the next state. Lastly, you can also indicate who can perform this transition or action by selecting them here.